the word that we use for saints, in Arabic, it's usually wali. Now, everybody, if you're a Muslim, you are a wali of God. Because Allah says, Allahu wali alladhina amanu. He is the wali of those who believe. And the beauty of the word wali is it's on a pattern which is both active and passive. So Allah is the active wali, and the wali that He tawalla is the passive wali. So it means somebody who's protected, but it also means an ally. So in tansurullah yansurkum, if you give God victory, God will give you victory. In other words, if you fight God's cause in the world, God will aid you in the world. And so you have what's called wilaya amma and wilaya khasa. So wilaya amma is a general wilaya that all Muslims share. And then the wilaya khasa has degrees. And the highest wali is the Prophet ﷺ. He is both wali and nabi. And so there's nothing higher than a wali nabi. Nabuwa is mawhuba, it's gifted from God. You can't earn prophecy. Wilaya is muktasaba. Although it has a Wahhabi aspect to it, there's a gift with it, but it's also something that's earned through mujahada, which is, there's a beautiful word in English, which is worthy. And worthy is actually a religious term in Old English, and it's equivalent to salih. It's somebody of merit, and merit is what you get on the Day of Judgment, according to traditional Christian theology. That it's merit that gives you salvation. And so the word in Arabic for saints, which is from it's from holy in Latin. It comes out of a Latin term, which means like sanctity. So it's holiness. Well, we say in our tradition about great scholars and things, qaddasallahu sirruhu. May God sanctify his soul. So we do have a concept of the sanctified soul. And in that way, we do believe in saints. Because there are some people in our community that say, there's no saints in Islam, which is not true, because the hallmark of a true religion is that it can produce a saint. If it can't produce a saint, it can't be a true religion. And the beauty, I was once on a panel with Jonathan Haidt, who Haidt, who wrote all these books about he wrote The Righteous Mind and things. And he was talking about religion and how he saw the positive of it and he saw the negative of it. And afterwards I had a conversation with him and I told him, when you talk about the negative religion, what you're talking about is what we would call the ego of a religion. It's not the religion itself. And I said, and my proof for that is every religion has an ideal human being. And that is how you measure the religion. And if in the Jewish tradition, it's called the tzaddik, which is siddiq. In the Hindu tradition, they call it like the sannyasi. In Buddhism, it's like the bodhisattva. But in our tradition, it's the wali. The hallmark of all of those, and I'm not a perennialist, but the hallmark of all of those is mercy. They have a rahma for people. They actually care about human beings. And the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah chose to define his own nature, he did it with rahma. Bismillah. He could have said, Bismillah al-adl al-muntaqim, in the name of God, the just, the avenger of wrongs. He could have done that. But he said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then when he described his prophet, he could have said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا عَدَالَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We only sent you as a justice for the whole world. He didn't say that. He said, we sent you as a mercy for the whole world. And that's the hallmark of a saint in our tradition, is they have universal compassion. They really actually care. And not just about humans, about plants, about rivers, about animals.
I think, as you mentioned before, about their humanity, and that is what really comes across in this series. And what's so incredible about it, incredibly rich about this series, is the level of detail, not only in the individuals, but also about the people around them, their environment, the landscape, their family history, their lineage. Even you talk about some of the politics in some cases, and you're presenting all the layers of their life through this collection, and conveying them to us in a very holistic manner. And that must have been a great challenge as well, Peter. I mean, how difficult was it to curate all of those images and gather all of that information?
Yeah, it was extremely challenging, partly because COVID kicked in and I'd planned to sort of travel around the world and dive into the family's albums and discover all these, incredible images, and I couldn't do that. So I spent a lot of time on the internet finding very poor quality images and spending days and days restoring them and trying to repair them. But it was just wonderful. Time just passed doing it. I was just looking at these amazing faces every day. So it was very blessed work. Yeah, it was beautiful, and I think we're all pleased with what the end result. I think it was very important for me to have images because I want to engage young people in these stories, and sometimes text is not enough. It's a very image-based society now. In my day, it was music. Now it's images of the language of the time. So it was.
Also the Muslims have, to a certain extent, lost the art of storytelling. There was a rich tabaqat literature up until, I would say, probably the mid-19th century. And one of the challenges we had is that there were a number of people who we felt were, very good scholars, very decent people. They understood what we were trying to do, but they couldn't tell a story. And so this was a huge challenge to be able to trace the arc of one of the life of one of these great men. The other thing was basically there was a paucity of material, which did surprise me. I thought that there would be more, and I'm talking about some of the awliya who were very famous, like Habib Ahmed Mashhur al-Haddad. It was very difficult to find a great deal of material. We were very lucky that Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi had immersed himself in Habib's life and had and delivered a very beautiful vignette. So this was a very big challenge, and to have Shaykh Hamza, who had direct experience, and one of the things that we tried to do with the series is that we wanted the authors to have had a direct experience of the men and women that they chronicled, to have some connection, and for the most part we were able to do that. And it makes a huge difference. And there are some very beautiful passages in Shaykh Hamza's book, which I wish we could read out, but they're very, very, they're vivid images of what it was like. The other thing that comes across in the series is the erudition of these men and women, and what they went through to get to the point where they could have been considered awliya or exemplars. They were steeped in knowledge, and they were how do you say, they were hafiz of Quran, muhaddithin, from children from very small age, so they were very pure. There was no room for, these are not people who played and had what we would consider now a normal life. And you tell this a story of Sheikh Marabat al-Hajj when they showed him a movie, right? And
He was in Sudan. This is like 1930s, and they call the Mauritanians Sharif. So these Sudanese said, Sharif, you have to come and see this amazing invention. And they took him to an outdoor theater. And he looked at it and he just said, A'udhu Billah, and he left. And I asked him what it was. He said it was two giant men shooting each other. And so I surmised from that it was probably a Western, you know. But I think Sidi Harun, he's really pointing out something very important, which is this idea of tabaqat literature. Biographical literature is very important. One of the things you notice about Western people, they read biographies. Like if you go to the biography section, it's a huge section in bookstores, and because you learn an immense about life from one person's life, and you learn that all great people go through incredible tribulations. You can't read any biography of a great person without seeing that they went through incredible tribulations in their life, and that just lets you know that one, it's part of life that everybody goes through that. But we had from early on Ibn Sa'ad, the Tabaqat literature, the great Hilyat al-Awliya, which Abu Na'im wanted to prove that they were all awliya. Like he called it Hilyat al-Awliya, the adornment of these awliya. And incredible, his biography of Imam al-Junayd is one of the most incredible things that you can find in the Arabic language. And the beauty of that is that you get a connection to these people in a way that you don't by just hearing their names. Now you know about them. And the other thing that is really important is that historically about 15 to 20% of all the tabaqat literature were women. And you see that after the 16th century that begins to diminish, and I think it's directly related to the decline and fall of the Muslim power. And the 15 to 20%, like in Ibn Sa'ad's Tabaqat, those are just the notables. It's not, and their notables were really exceptional. And the women tended to be hidden. So there were many more, but those are the ones we know about. And so that's a really important, like Hani is amazing, Ibn Hajar's teacher, who knew all four madhabs. She educated each one of her sons in one of the madhabs.
And we don't.
I think it's significant. Also, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi transmitted knowledge to 15 people through giving the khirqa, which was the symbol of the transmission. And of those 15 people, 14 were women. So this idea that women are somehow, that the society, Muslim society is misogynist, or women are in the background is a very modern concept, I think.
Common concept that women haven't really been part of that. It's a lost legacy, really, where they were integral to Islamic history. And the wonderful entry you have is written by Dr. Kareem, and on the female sage, Sayyida Fatima al-Yashrutiyya, which gives us a rare insight, really, into a female sage's family, her lineage, her environment. And Michael, could you briefly give us an insight into her life, and also how important is she as a gateway into gleaning a better understanding of women's roles on the spiritual path?
Well, she's I think probably, if not unique, a very unusual example of a woman in the present, in the 20th century. She passed away, I think, in 1982. And she was, in many ways, she was the link to the teaching of her father, who was born in the 18th century. So she brought an 18th century vision of spirituality, and she carried it with her, and her brothers as well. They carried on the tradition of which was a Darqawi, I think, tradition. But I think that she was incredibly influential, but she was still always deferred to her brother, as the sheikh. If someone came, if the delegations automatically would go to her first, and she would send them away to her brother and say, first you go to him, then you can come and visit to me. So she was, and Sheikh al-Hashimi, who was the great Syrian sheikh from the Darqawa, he lamented that people didn't realize who the treasure that she was, and he affirmed that she was one of the great knowers of God, and but people, because she was a woman, and she had to observe the proprieties of being a woman in a modern society. So she was an interesting transitional figure. Now I don't know of anyone of her stature who's known publicly. Are you aware of anyone who like that, like Sayyida Fatima?
Yeah, I think that goes for men and women generally. There's not a lot of at that level.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a handful, and then there's hidden people. You can never. I mean, Sayyidina Musa was asked who was the most knowledgeable person on earth, and he thought he was, but Allah sent him at Khadr, so you never know who's out there. But
Right.
It's also because of humility as well. Perhaps they don't want to be known. That could be one of the reasons that these stories aren't really known more widely. So picking up on what you said about connection and being connected to these people, in this age of hyper-connectivity, hyper-digital connectivity, many have lost that real connection to our spiritual selves, to the sacred. So how crucial are these figures in helping us realign to our spiritual selves? Shaykh Hamza or Michael?
yeah, you want to say something?
Well, I remember asking Sheikh Abdul Qadir Isa, who was a wonderful Syrian sheikh, about that, and he said very economically, he said, he who is connected to the one who is connected is connected, and he who is connected to the one who is not connected is not connected. But recently I had a conversation with Dr. Mustafa al-Badawi, and he said something, I was very moved by what he said. He said, you have to remember this is not about people. This is about Allah. And Allah guides us through people, but they are the instruments by which we're guided. And he said sometimes someone is guided that Allah guides you to someone who isn't necessarily authentic, or who isn't who you think they are, and that's for your benefit. And he said that if you're sincere, he believes, and I agree with him, that you're safe. That your sincerity is the
Yeah.
And I thought that was very beautiful, because people make all this about personalities and how beautiful. Like Habib Ahmed was incredibly beautiful, and we all loved to sit with him, and his character was beautiful. I spent years with Sayyid Omar Abdullah, who I adored. But it's not the personality, it's what they bring you along. There's an anecdote that one of the awliya had a dream of Rasulullah ﷺ, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, what is the best thing you can do in this world? And according to the narration, Rasulullah ﷺ said, to sit with a wali Allah for as long as it takes to milk a goat or cook an egg. And we've all experienced this, sitting with these people. I don't know, it changes you, and keeping company together with, suhbah, because collectively there's so many beautiful souls here we've met. It lifts the heart,
We're in a culture that atomizes, and COVID became an opportunity for, to atomize people, put them online. Children were put online. They told us, oh, it's going to be, for a few weeks. So weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and the devastation that caused for a whole generation now that spent 2 years online in this intermediated world of pixelated. Images, and it's horrible, and it has, we know that these machines depress people. They make people ill, and being with human beings, even just sohbah is very important, just good company. They say that, the Prophet ﷺ told us that being in good company is like being with the Jalis al-Salih. The likeness of the one who sits with a worthy person is like the one who goes to a musk dealer. And if you've ever been in Mecca or Medina where they have the musk dealer, they always give you musk. They put it on you and you get to try. He said, you go out with that good scent. That's what's sitting with worthy people. And so it's not just, these are the outliers. These are the really, really out there exceptional people. But there are lots of good people still in our community, and that's very important. If you've had the good fortune of meeting with these people, it's great, But there are good people, and there's good company, and just being in good company is really important, and maintaining our humanity, because we are a gregarious species. We don't do well. Aristotle said that the city was natural. It's not an artificial construct. And our religion, the capital of our religion is named the city, that we need company. And the Prophet ﷺ encouraged company. He made fraternities. He brought people together. It's all about the Jum'ah, the 5 prayers. People don't know this. Everybody thinks there's only one mosque in Medina. The Prophet had almost 50 mosques in Medina during his time. This was a small city because he made sure every neighborhood had a mosque. Because the point is that the neighborhood becomes a community. So if so-and-so doesn't show up for Fajr, they visit to make sure he was okay. And that's why community is so essential in our religion. And we're in a culture now that really wants to atomize. People talk about the crisis of the family. The crisis of the family has been going on for over 100 years because the atomic family is not a family. That's the end of a family. And now they've split the atom, and we're getting all this toxic, radiation from splitting the atomic family. Right? So extended family is very important. Cousins, first cousins. And a lot of you still have that. And you have to maintain those ties. Sirat al-Rahm. So it's really important. These people, they are rare. But there are people that have portions of these things. And it's really important to recognize that we have gifts in all of our communities. They're these gems.
And I want to talk about ego as well, and you speak about the entire absence of ego with these saints and sages, and yet, of course, you had to photograph them, you had to put them on the front cover of these series. But how did you kind of negotiate that? How did you reconcile that? And also, how difficult was it for them to agree to be photographed as well in the first place?
I think many of the people I met had never been photographed before, and all I could do was ask because I felt the importance of this time for them to be seen. Because I sat with people, they'd talk about all these names, but it didn't mean anything to me. Once you've seen the face, then you can relate to that person. So to me, it was very important. And for whatever reason, they agreed to let me photograph them. And I don't know why that happened. And there was a horrible moment when I realized many of them had passed away after I took their pictures, and I got very nervous. And I thought, if the word ever gets out. But I spoke to Dr. Mustafa Badawi, and he said, no, don't worry about it. They were already they were about to leave the world, so that's why they agreed to let you photograph them. So.
When we were in Tuaymarat, Abdullah and I went to Tuaymarat together, and so he always carries his tea set. So we used to have like English tea out in the Saharan desert. But for like 3 days, I saw him walking around with all his cameras. And I said, have you gotten some good pictures? He said, I haven't taken any yet. I said, really? He said, yeah, they've never been photographed, so I just want them to get used to the cameras. I don't want to come out guns blazing. And, that tells you a lot about Peter Sanders, because I think the reason why he got access to a lot of people that would not have given access is because of that adab, that he always had really beautiful adab. And Murabit al-Hajj, I know that he considered photographs makruh, because there is a khilaf. A lot of the earlier scholars, when it first showed up, they saw it as haram, because it was a type of, we call it taswir. It's a type of image making. But I know he wouldn't have permitted it if he didn't think, because when I first asked him, he said, A'udhu billah, And then I explained to him, that there's people that we just want to show people in places that don't have access to people like you. And so after that, he said, Bismillah, like he let him do it. But I know that was his basic feeling about it, that it wasn't something. And one of the things I actually, I think people like Peter Sanders are very important, because these are historical photographs. But I also think the whole image-based society has gone insane. And the fact that everybody has cameras now, it's really created. I see people all the time, they say, can I take a picture? I said, just take a picture.
Yeah.
You're gonna miss, something's gone really wrong. And I have I have no pictures of all these people. Except from, and I'm glad he took them, but I never thought of taking pictures with any of these people. It never occurred to me, like I want a picture next to him. It never occurred to me to do that. I just wanted to be there with them. And I can close my eyes, and I guarantee I can see any of those people with my mind's eye. If I close my eyes, I can see any one of them as clear as a photograph.
I think that photo session with Sheikh Murabit al-Hajj was one of the hardest photo sessions I ever did. Because I felt it was really an imposition on what he did on his daily life. And every time in the desert, it's a desert Mauritania, it's so quiet. And every time I pressed the shutter, it seemed so loud. I just wanted the floor to open
Kaboom!
Up. But I felt it was so important, because I thought once he's gone, then that picture of the traditional sheikh is gone.
And the amazing thing, they really do look like posed pictures, even though they were completely natural. Like that kind of dignified state that he exemplified.
Yeah, and when we were doing this project, I asked Shaykh Rahman, because I wanted earlier pictures of him. I said, are there earlier pictures of your father? He said, there's nothing. You're the first person.
First person, yeah.
The book that you wrote for Shaykh Murabit al-Hajj is so elegantly written, it's so beautifully written. And you mentioned a salient characteristic of his life is the sacred monotony, which I really I thought that was stunning. So could you just tell us a bit more about what that meant? And
Arabic for monotony is rataba, which is the word also for the wird that you do every day, the ratib. So it's related, it's the same root. And one of the things about life is that you really, at a certain point, you have to come to terms with, it is Groundhog Day. It is, and the secret of that is that it's not, the same old. It's every day is a new day. Kullu yawman huwa fi sha'n. Every day God is doing something new. Every cell in your body is being recreated. All your blood is going to be completely renewed. And if you're in the traditional occasionalist view, it's every instant that it's recreated. So Allah's recreating existence in every instant. So coming to terms with monotony is really important, because people get bored. And the word in Arabic, one of the words is malal. And in the Quran, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, God does not bore of giving you reward until you bore of giving him good deeds. And so it's very important for us to just recognize the gift, the daily gift of practice. And in our culture, excellence has been reduced to sports and music. And the secret of every great athlete is constant practice. In fact, Habib just the other day, he's on my mind because we listened to him and he actually had some really important things to say. But one of the things he said is that his life is, he said, eat, sleep, practice, repeat. And that's why he's the greatest mixed martial artist on the planet, because of that constant practice. So he's doing to his body what we can do with our souls. And it's doing that practice every single day. Anybody who's ever learned a musical instrument knows you just practice the same things over and over again. But I learned from Hamza Thompson, who's a very famous bass player who became Muslim. For older people in the audience, he did all the famous bass riffs for Donovan's hits. But he once said to me, what does practice make? And I said, perfect. He said, no, it doesn't. It makes permanent. He said, you have to practice the right thing. And this is where it becomes important to have guides, to have people. When you study, you need a teacher. And in our tradition, you have over-the-counter dhikr, and then you have dhikr that is prescription. And it's really important because prescription dhikr can cause a lot of harm. People that are repeating divine names have to be very careful because every divine name has a khasiyah. And things can happen to people that they're not ready for. But the most important dhikrs are istighfar, salah ala nabi, and la ilaha illallah. Those are all over-the-counter dhikrs. And you can do those. They won't cause any trouble. They'll just be helpful in your presence. And then the other thing that's really important is this culture is obsessed now with what they call mindfulness. Nobody was more mindful than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had a dua for every single act throughout his day. And that type of practice is something of just becoming present. When he dressed, he had a dua. When he first got up, when he first woke up, Marabt al-Hajj every morning, because I lived in his house, in his tent, and the first thing when he would open his eyes, he would do the last section of Ali Imran, Inna fi khalq as-samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilaf al-layli wan nahar la ayatin. He would do that till the end, because the Prophet did that when he first woke up. He did that every single morning when he woke up. Everything he did with dua, Marabt al-Hajj. And he was meticulous about the Sunnah. There was a sandal turned up, and in Muslim culture, it's kind of an adab to turn the sandal over. He turned it over, and then he put it back. And then somebody asked him about it. He said, "Ma ra'aytu shay'an warada fi sunnah." He said, "I've never seen anything came down from the Sunnah in doing that." So it's a nice thing. I mean, people can do it. But his point was, for him, if it wasn't from the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't do it.
And you're right about the boredom thing. People have this fear, this panic around boredom. I mean, there was even an experiment that I think they would rather give themselves electric shocks than to sit in silence and reflect for 15 minutes.
One of the worst things about the machine is people can be occupied. They never have that downtime, which is why it's really important. The Japanese have a word called forest bathing, which is very important, just to go and walk in parks if you can get out and just be in God's creation, because we're just surrounded by these artificial lights, all these images. There's a verse in the Quran when Ibrahim said, what are these images that you're assiduously devoted to? Akifun alayh, you're these amthal, the timthal that you're assiduously devoted to. And I think, we're seeing a real shift in human behavior that's unprecedented, and we don't know where it's going. And Nietzsche actually said, nobody is thinking 1,000 years from now with all these new inventions. Like he saw, he had that, the capacity to actually think down the road, where's this all leading? And Thoreau famously said, when they did the transatlantic cable across from England to the U.S., Thoreau said, I'm afraid that the first thing that'll come across is that the Queen has a sore throat. It's just trivial, and so much. I mean, we really need information diets. You know, there's a book called How to Break Up with Your Cell Phone. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, unfortunately, because I've been looking at my phone too much. But so Peter, you've documented Muslims around the world for decades now, and the meetings with mountains, this feels like very much a more profound step after that, through the exemplars series. And what new learnings and insights have you actually learnt in this process?
Well, I mean, this was not just my images and what happened in the meetings. This was really going into their lives, which I think is very important. Because, you know, sometimes I meet people, I met them for like 5 minutes. I knew they were somebody special, but I didn't know anything about their lives, you know. And once you start to delve into their lives, you learn things that you can benefit for your own life. And you know, none of them had easy lives. They had very difficult, all of them.
It's a very important point.
Yeah.
One of the things that was so striking was how much difficulty every single one of these people had. I mean, Sayyida Fatima al-Yashrutiyya, she went through wars and revolutions and all kinds of terrible things, and had to relocate and move. And I mean, as I said, Sayyid Omar Abdullah, I knew him very well, but I didn't know anything about his life. He'd been in prison. He'd been you know, in coups and revolutions, and had to leave his homeland and relocate. And Habib Ahmed Mashhur, you know, had been in a really devastating accident and was lame, and you know, and yet when I would come in, the thing that struck me deeply, I would come in to see him, and he would get up and stand on his leg and say, Haroon, Allah, 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 Haroon. You know, he was like, and I was nobody. You know, I mean, this is the way he was. So we learned, you know, where, and Sufi Abdullah, who was just an incredible character. I'm sure many of you may have encountered him. He was like very tall, but you know, when he was he was a sepoy in the British Indian Army at the age of 17. By the time he was 19, he was a prisoner of war. He'd been wounded. He walked across Europe to get back home, you know, after the war. You know, it's an incredible life, and nobody knew anything about this. There were 20 years in his life that the family really couldn't account for. They had some vague stories and so on. And we were lucky because one of our dear friends from Pakistan, who was a retired general, he ferreted out his entire military record. And he said it was like finding a needle in a haystack, because he wasn't, you know, an officer or anything like that. And it told us such an incredible story. It was very moving, and it explained everything that he did when he finally got to Birmingham in Britain and developed his community. And you have so much, it touches you, you know. And all these people had this kind of hardship and difficulty, and it makes you, so they're not, because most of us met these people when they were in their later years, so they were maybe, you know, more settled but they were young once, and they had to go through all the, you know, travel and tribulations and all of these things. So that was a great eye-opener for us, and I hope that in aggregate these stories sort of give a picture of what it takes to actually reach that station in, you know, spiritually.
Yeah, the practice. And then Ibn al-Munkadir, who was one of Imam Malik's primary teachers, he said, "Jahadtu nafsi 50 aman hatta istaqamat li." I struggled with my ego for 50 years till it finally became upright. So it is, Allah gives most people, the Prophet said, "A'mar ummati ma bayna sittin wa sab'in." The age of my ummah is between 60 and 70 years. That's generally what it takes. The beauty of dying before that is the Prophet ﷺ said, if you're on that path, it'll be completed in the grave. Like people that are trying to memorize the Quran and they die before it, the angels will complete it in the grave. They'll be raised up as hufad. So this is all niyat, a'malu bin niyat. But I want to point one thing out about these people that's very significant because of Sufi Abdullah, who I actually met when I was very young. I was like 18 years old. And we came, they had a big festivity. And they marched through the streets with flags, and he fed people constantly. And this is a hallmark of these people, is they feed people. And I think we forget the importance of just feeding people. Companion in our language is the one you eat with, break bread with. And so feeding is really important. And I did a study of the Prophet's feeding homeless, because he fed on average 70 homeless people every day. And I worked out he fed at least 500,000 meals. So that's a sunnah. It's a forgotten sunnah of feeding homeless people. But these are people that really they feed people. And the Prophet ﷺ in that amazing, they talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The Prophet, long before Maslow, gave us the hierarchy of needs, because he actually, it's better, of course, because it's our Prophet ﷺ, but it's better than Maslow's, because he put Afshu Salam was the first one, spread security, because without security, and there's a video on YouTube of these very primitive hunter-gatherers. They're one of the last hunter-gatherers in Africa, in East Africa, and the guy's like trying to ask them metaphysical questions. He says, "What's the meaning of life?" And he's like, "Meat." And then he says, what's a good day for you if we find meat? And like everything was just about survival. And that's why when Allah says, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَ فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Let them worship this house, the Lord of this house, who has fed you and given you security. Because without food and security, there's no higher order. And so the Prophet said, Afshu salam, spread peace. It's his first khutbah in Medina. Afshu salam, wa at'imu ta'am, and feed people. Wasil al-arham, and maintain your kinship bonds. Wasallu bil-layli wan-nasu niyam. And then he said, pray at night. That's the hierarchy. And then he said, tadkhul al-jannata bis-salam. You will enter paradise in peace if you follow that order. Spread peace, feed people, pray, and then you'll get into paradise. And maintain your kinship bonds, family.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was so brilliantly put. And now I'm going to open it up to the floor for any questions. If there are some roaming mics on every level, so I think if you just raise your hands really high, I can't see anybody right now. If we could have the lights up as well on the audience. And then we will have someone get a microphone to you. And please, could you kindly restrict your, don't do comments, please just have questions ready. Thank you. Thanks, that was such a wonderful conversation. That was really wonderful. So hopefully it will be extended. There's one in the second row on my right. I can't see. Oh, so just wait for the microphone, thanks. Number 5. Number 5, yeah. It's like bingo.
Assalamu alaikum all. Thank you so much for coming. It's really been an honor to sit here and listen.
Could you do it a bit higher?
Yes, behind, of course, Sheikh Mohammed. It's even more of an honor. But anyway, I wanted to ask about the modern day saint. I suppose some of you saw that movie, The Mauritanian, about the fellow in Guantanamo Bay who, I think it's the Mauritanian, the fellow in Guantanamo Bay who in the end came out and, mashallah, his guard converted. And he put up with terrible things. I mean, some of that parts of that movie I wish I'd never seen. But is there sort of, you know how, I think the Catholics have a criterion for sainthood. One would think he would be of that caliber, even though he's lived, I think he definitely knew the Quran by heart as a child, but he's a relatively normative Muslim. But just the way he carried himself through that trial, one would have thought he's a saint. But I just wondered if there's any kind of criteria in Islam for these things.
So it was about the Mauritanian who is in Guantanamo Bay and the way he carried himself. Is like, what's the criteria for a saint? Because he carried himself as a saint, you're saying? Yeah.
I mean, I saw that film. It was a very powerful film. But actually seeing him at the end of it, I really wanted to meet him because his face was just so full of light. And I missed the opportunity to meet him, but I would love to meet him. I mean, he was the man who was in prison, the Mauritanian.
You met
I know him, yeah. We've just communicated over Zoom. Shaykh Abdullah says, "Zoom yughni an al-qudum." He is from Zawaya clan. He's from the same clans that Murabta al-Hajj comes from. They're all kind of like that. Like, I imagine the vast majority of them that would have been in that situation would have handled it like that. First of all, they are extremely tough people. They grow up in it. You saw the environment they grow up in. They don't cry. I mean, I saw a little kid came to me with this massive, he'd kicked something and this piece of wood went into his big toe.
Oh.
And he came to ask me to pull it out. And there was no tears, nothing. I mean, he just showed no, like in our culture, if he had a sliver, he would be like bawling and screaming. And I pulled it out and blood just shot out. And he laughed, he just thought it was kind of funny. But they're very tough people. And I was with Shaykh Abdullah Wild Ahmedna, who's an incredible scholar, very tall, and he's Malak, Yamshi ala al-ard, and he's really an angelic person. He lived with me in California for a while, but he's the grandson of Murabta al-Hajj, and he's a great scholar in his own right. And we were going around the Kaaba, and one of these mutawwa, grabbed him and started screaming out about something, and they were about to get into a fight. And I grabbed Shaykh Abdullah, and he just looked at me and said, "I'm a Sahrawi," like I'm a Sahrawi, like he humiliated him, and and we were at the Kaaba, and so, they're very tough people, and I think he exemplified a quality that the Zawaya people have in Mauritania. In terms of first of all, whenever we talk about these people, we say, according to our Prophet, وَلَا نُزَكِّي عَلَى اللَّهِ أَحَدٍ. لَا نُزَكِّي عَلَى اللَّهِ أَحَدٍ means that we do not make a claim that we know their wilaya. Wilaya is known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. But there are signs, and we have a dhann, we have a belief about them, and generally the qualities is their ittiba', the following the Prophet ﷺ, the love of the Prophet, and then the presence that they have that you get from them. But I will say, there are false teachers also, and part of the past sometimes is having a false teacher. And it will test your sincerity with Allah, because some people will follow a teacher and then they find out it's a false teacher and then they somehow lose their faith. But like the American poet said, you say you lost your faith, it's not like that. You had no faith to lose and you know it. So what kind of faith is it when you lose it? Right? So you can be tested with a false teacher, and that does happen. But these are the qualities in terms of, discernment. Very often, Allah gives them, some extraordinary kashf is common with some of these people. They might not even know it. It's just something Allah gives them. He unveils something for them. I tell a story in there, which is a true story. I was sitting with Murabta al-Hajj, and he had a dara'a on, and it had quite a bit of just soil around the collar. And it just occurred to me, he was reading a book. It just occurred to me, the hadith, an-nadhafatu min al-iman, cleanliness is from iman, and I kind of wondered why he had this soil. Right when I thought that, I just thought it, he put down the book, and he looked at me and he said, "Have you ever heard the hadith, al-badadatu min al-iman?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do you know what badada is?" I said, "No." He said, "Go get the qamus, the dictionary." So I went and got the Feroz Abadi, And badada is like not being concerned about your appearance. It's kind of disheveled. And so it said dishevelment is from faith. And so later, years later, I was in Medina, and I went into a bookstore. I had told somebody this story, and he said, that can't be right. I don't think that doesn't sound right. And I went into a bookstore, and I found Hujjatullah al-Baligha, and I just pulled it out and opened it up. It was after Asr, and it said, as for the hadith, al-nadhafatu min al-iman wa tahur shatar al-iman, that does not negate the hadith al-badada min al-iman, because the badada is for the Bedouin. And these other hadiths are for city dwellers, because if Bedouin had to be concerned about these things, it would make their lives very hard. So it's a way that it's one of the beauties of Islam. We're the only religion that has fiqh al-Badu. Like Aboriginal peoples in Christianity, they were always forced to become settled, and they lost their badawa. Islam always recognized that Allah created everything in pairs. When the Bedouin go, we go with them. So there always has to be nomadic people, because everything's created in pairs. So, that's one of the qualities that you'll find in some of these people, is that it's almost like they just get into your heart. And then the other thing, which is very real, something that the Turks call faiz, which is from the failed, like faildan. There's a kind of emanation in the presence, and you can feel this also even from people that have left the world, that in what are called maqams. There's an adab to visiting these places, and there's a lot of bid'ah that happens in the maqams that the people of the ulama condemn. But generally the maqams are there for a reason. And when the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever visits man zara akhan lillah la yuzuruhu illa lillah, qalat al-malaikatu laqad tibta wa taba mimshak. Whoever visits a person for the sake of God, and only visits him for the sake of God, that the angels say, you are purified by this visit, and your steps are pure. Sheikh, one of my teachers, Abdul Hayy al-Amrawi, wrote a book, and in that book he said there's no distinction between living and the dead in that hadith. That if you visit, if you're in a city, you don't travel for those specific reasons according to the hadith, for like a nadhar, devotional thing. But if you're in a city and there's a maqam and you visit it, if it's a famous scholar or a famous saint, it's go in and say salam and make dua for them. I mean, this is something that's been in our tradition. The Prophet visited Hamza every week. And he used to go to Baqi', he would visit. And he said, Kuntu anhaakum an ziyarat al-qubur. Right? I used to tell you don't visit the graves because they were close to grave worshipping. But once he knew that they understood Tawheed and knew how to visit graves, he said, Zuruha. Visit the graves, فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُكُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ, because it will remind you about the afterlife.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, there's quite a few questions. I think I'm going to take one at the back. And there's a gentleman at the back on the right. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, thank you and welcome to Bradford for giving us such a beautiful talk today. My questions to the panel, in Islamic history and the Sufi tariqas, particularly there was a martial tradition. If we think about Imam Shamil of the Caucasus, in our modern context, how do we incorporate the value and benefit of some of those aspects in terms of our spiritual development? Obviously, living in urban 21st century settings, but how can we benefit from that? And I suppose it also relates to the other theme of developing aspects of masculinity, which again linked to the Sunnah, and maybe suppressed in particularly a sort of secular modern context.
I'm not sure.
It's a great question. martial arts is very important. I have 5 boys, taught them martial arts. So I think martial arts is really important. Muslims always learn martial arts. Women should learn it. And our young boys should all be trained in how to defend themselves, because we human beings can be aggressive, and you should always de-escalate if you can, but if you can't, then you should be able at least to defend yourself. The Prophet ﷺ, all of the Sahaba were martial artists. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever learns martial arts and then leaves it, he has disobeyed Abu al-Qasim. من تعلم الرماية ثم تركها فقد عصى أبو القاسم. So I personally think it's very important. You know, I'd love to see like martial arts where they get belts with Hifz al-Quran, like put them together. So they're like a black belt in the Quran as well. But it's really important. And this idea, one of the things, if you read Herbert Marcuse, and the part of the strategy in the West is there's a war on masculinity, and so all of masculinity is toxic. So there's a feminization of men that's happening, and it's very dangerous, because when things break down, men have to protect women and children. And I guarantee you, when they break down, we're in a civil society and we're fortunate, and women can walk around relatively safe. But when things break down, in Ukraine there's rape going on. In Bosnia there was rape going on. The Yazidi girls would have loved for real virile men to have defended them. So it's very important that we don't buy into this lie. These Hollywood films that show this 110-pound girl beating up 3 Russian mafia and think this is all fantasy, that men have physical advantage over women. So it's very important that we inculcate in our young people chivalry, futuwa. This is extremely important. And toxic masculinity is not enough masculinity. It's not too much, because real masculinity is chivalry. It's chivalrous. So these are not men, they're beasts. And one of the most beautiful hadiths, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا رَأَيْتُ أَمْلَكَ لِذِي لُبٍّ مِنْ كُنَّ. I've never seen women who could captivate a man of deep inner core like you women. And Rumi said about that, he said, it's men of inner core that are captivated by women. It's the beasts are the ones that dominate women. And our Prophet ﷺ was gentle with his women. رِفْقًا بِالْقَوَارِيرِ. He said, go easy on the brittle ones. That's what he called women. And this idea of turning women into men and men into women, this is an inversion of reality. It's qalb al-haqa'iq. It's what shaitan wants to do. Make masculine women and make feminine men. And we're an ummah of fitra. We want strong, virile, masculine men, and we want beautiful, brittle, feminine women. Silence. Yeah.
I was just going to check if there are any questions at the. Oh, I think there's one in the upper row, in the middle. Yeah, number 4. That's it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. It's an absolute honor to be in the presence of such great people. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for allowing us to be here. It's a bit of a top trump type question, but who would you recommend that people from the West, for example, would now living, and we should really make an effort to try and visit?
Who should we make an effort to really visit in the West? Saints in the West. Oh, anywhere. Sorry, anywhere in the world.
That's a very sensitive question, because we don't really want to canonize anyone.
Yeah.
There are people. I think it's better if we don't address that directly, because.
We wait till they're dead.
We wait till they're dead.
Ibn Mas'ud said, "Man yastan falyastan bil mayyit, fa inna al-hayy la tu'man awaqibuhu." Whoever wants to take a sunnah from dead people, because living people are still under investigation.
Yeah, mashallah.
And of course, that could also mean dead, like mayyit to the ego as well. So it could be interpreted that way. But generally, there's a wonderful story in Herodotus's histories about the meeting between Croesus and Solon. Solon was the great Athenian lawgiver, and he visited Croesus in his palace, and he had this massive palace. And after he showed him all of his riches, he said, "Who's the happiest person you've ever met?" And he said, "Oh, that would have to be so-and-so and so-and-so." And he said, "Who were they?" And he said, "They were two young boys in Greece who had such filial piety that when they couldn't find the ox to take their mother to the temple, they carried her 90 miles and then died. And they were honored at the temples for their filial piety." And he said, "Well, then who?" And he said, "That would have to be General so-and-so." He said, "Why?" He said, he was noble and he lived to see his grandchildren, and he died in a good state. And he said, "Well, what about me?" He said, "Oh, we couldn't tell until you're dead." And he said, "Well, I look at my palace and look at all these things." He said, no, we would have to wait till you're dead." So Croesus went to the oracle, and he wanted to invade Persia. And he went to the oracle and asked the oracle, and the oracle said, you will destroy a great empire. So he thought it meant he would defeat the Persians. So he invaded, and he destroyed his empire. And he got captured by Cyrus. And Cyrus had a wood put, and he was burning him and so when he was on the thing about to be burnt alive, he started saying, "Solon, Solon." And then he said, Cyrus said, "What's he saying?" And he said, "We don't know." He said, "Bring him here." And he brought him, and he said, "What were you saying?" He said, I was remembering something a wise man said to me that I wish every ruler could hear, that we don't know our lives until they're over. And this is why, like I said, we have a good dhan about people. And the truth is, and I'll tell you something, one of the most powerful things I've ever heard was from Habib about Abdullah al-Haddad, who was a mujaddid, and he's honored with lines of poetry over the Prophet's grave. Yeah. But he once visited a village in Yemen, and after Fajr, they prayed Fajr. And this is written by Hassawi, who was one of his companions. And after Fajr, they came out, and he greeted every single person. It took quite some time before they left. And he said, "Why? You could have just said salam to all of them." And he said, "Why do you think they wanted to say salam to me?" And he said, "Well, they think you're close to God." He said, "Shouldn't I think the same about each one of them?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "There's no good in a companion that doesn't see in you what you see in him." And so it's very important that the Moroccans have a beautiful saying, consider every person you meet to be a wali of God, and treat them like that. And the great poet Hafiz said, how would this world be if everyone knew that everyone else was also a guest of God in this banquet? How would you treat the guest of God?